Maplewood Falls, a small peaceful town where every street carried an eerie sense of quiet. Here, everyone thought they knew each other, but the truth was far more complicated. The people of this town did not welcome sudden changes. They lived in a world of predictability, where everything followed an unwritten order. Every house was well maintained, every lawn lush and green, every porch tidy. Everything seemed perfect, or at least that's what they believed. Nothing particularly exciting ever happened in Maplewood Falls. And the residents liked it that way. As the late afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, it bathed the sky in warm hues of amber and gold. Golden rays stretched across rooftops, casting a soft, comforting glow over neatly trimmed lawns, each blade of grass cut to absolute precision. On the front porches, neighbors stood sipping tea, chatting leisurely, savoring the town's tranquil atmosphere. From a small park nearby, the laughter of children rang through the air, mingling with the excited barks of small dogs chasing falling autumn leaves. Maplewood Falls looked like a postcard, a perfect snapshot frozen in time, untouched, unchanged. No one could have imagined that peace was about to be shattered. Amidst the serene landscape, a moving truck rolled slowly down the town's main street. The deep rumble of the engine momentarily disturbed the silence, though it wasn't loud enough to draw much attention. A few passers-by glanced at it, their gazes fleeting, before returning to their daily routines. The truck made a turn onto Elm Street, rolling to a stop in front of a modest house nestled between two others, homes that had stood for decades, untouched by time. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man. Jamal Williams. He stood still for a moment, taking in his surroundings, breathing in the crisp autumn air. To the few who noticed him, he seemed utterly unremarkable, just another new resident moving in, nothing more. No one knew that he had brought more than just furniture and boxes. He had brought change. Jamal Williams was not the kind of man who demanded attention. If you passed him on the street, you might not even take a second look. With closely cropped hair, a gentle smile, and simple clothing, he blended in effortlessly.
No flash. No spectacle.
But there was something about him. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, calm, deliberate. Or maybe it was his eyes, sharp, observant, as if he saw far more than what lay on the surface. He stood in a town where he was a stranger, yet he didn't seem lost. No one knew who he was. And he didn't yet realize. Maplewood Falls was not as peaceful as it seemed. Because in this town, there were those who despised change. And they were about to find out exactly who Jamal Williams really was. If there was one person who believed it was their duty to uphold the order of Maplewood Falls, it was Karen Caldwell. She wasn't an official member of the Homeowners Association, HOA. She didn't hold any position in local government. But that never stopped her from acting like she did. Karen Caldwell wasn't just someone who followed the rules, she lived for them. Every street, every yard, every mailbox had to be placed just right. If something was out of order, it wasn't just wrong, it was a violation. And anyone who dared to disrupt the perfection she had built became a problem that needed to be dealt with. Wherever Karen went, Peter Martin wasn't far behind. Peter didn't have Karen's authority. He lacked her ferocity, her iron will. But he was always there, nodding in agreement, standing just outside the conflict but cheering the loudest. Peter never started trouble on his own, but he never questioned Karen either. If she said something was wrong, then it was wrong. If she said someone was a problem, then they were a problem. To them, Maplewood Falls wasn't just a town, it was their domain. For Karen and Peter, Maplewood Falls wasn't just a place to live. It had to be pristine. It had to be orderly. And most importantly, it had to follow the rules. Their rules. Karen had lived here for over 20 years, watching as houses were built, fences were painted, and lawns were cut to precise standards. And in her mind, anyone who failed to uphold that perfection was a threat. A trash can placed in the wrong spot? A crime. Blaulicht. A car parked slightly off-center in the driveway? A major issue.
Automobil. Alaun Grovingsri inches too high?
A disaster.
Zemling.
Peter? He wasn't necessarily a bad person, just a follower. Someone too comfortable taking orders to ever question them. If anyone disrupted the order, Karen would appear in an instant, and Peter would stand behind her, nodding along. They had kept this town in check for years. And they had no plans of stopping. The day Jamal Williams' moving truck rolled down Elm Street, Karen and Peter were already watching.
Standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, analyzing every detail.
At first, they didn't react. A new neighbor? Fine. As long as he followed the rules. But then, Karen saw something she could not ignore. It wasn't a total mess, but to Karen, it might as well have been. A few cardboard boxes scattered across the lawn. A moving truck still parked in the driveway. Grass that hadn't been trimmed to perfection. To anyone else, it was just the natural process of moving in. To Karen Caldwell, it was an offense. Karen crossed her arms tighter, her eyes narrowing. Karen, sternly, Peter, look at that.
Peter glanced up, blinking.
Peter, confused, look at what? Karen, pointing that mess. He hasn't even been here for a full day, and he's already turning this place into a disaster. Peter shrugged. Peter, I don't know, Karen. It doesn't look that bad. Karen cut him off, her voice sharp. Karen, coldly, we have standards, Peter. If we don't act now, he'll think he can do whatever he wants. Peter swallowed, his eyes drifting toward Jamal. Jamal, completely unaware of the storm brewing across the street, continued unpacking his belongings, moving with calm confidence. But Karen had already made up her mind. She wouldn't let this slide. Karen, resolute, we have to show him who keeps order around here. Peter sighed but nodded. Because when Karen made a decision, there was no stopping her. Karen took a step forward, her heels clicking against the pavement, each step carrying the weight of authority she had given herself. Peter followed closely behind. For years, they had ruled this neighborhood. And they weren't about to let one man change that.
Karen SAW an Outsider.
She saw a problem to be fixed. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was that Jamal Williams wasn't just a new neighbor. He was something else entirely. And soon enough, she was going to find out exactly who he was.
The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the rooftops of Maplewood Falls.
But Karen Caldwell paid no attention to the beauty of the evening. She was too busy watching. Standing on her porch, arms crossed, her sharp eyes were fixed on the new house, the one belonging to Jamal Williams. To anyone else, the scene was unremarkable. A man unpacking his belongings, a few cardboard boxes still scattered across the lawn, a completely normal sight. But to Karen, this was a problem. She tilted her head, her eyes scanning the yard with unrelenting scrutiny. A chair not placed neatly. A few boxes left on the driveway. Grass not trimmed to perfection like the rest of the neighborhood.
Unacceptable.
Karen took a deep breath. If she didn't act now, this would set a bad precedent. The newcomer needed to understand that Maplewood Falls had rules. She turned sharply, looking at Peter, who was absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone.
Karen, snapping, Peter, come here. Peter glanced up, frowning. Peter, what? Karen, firmly, now.
Peter sighed, slipping his phone into his pocket and reluctantly walking over. Peter, hesitant, Karen, I don't know if this is really. Karen, cutting him off, we need to handle this before it gets out of control. And before Peter could protest, Karen was already marching toward Jamal's house. Peter had no choice but to follow. Jamal had just finished setting up a small table in his garage when he heard the sharp sound of footsteps approaching. He looked up and saw them. A tall blonde woman with a hard expression, her lips pressed into a firm line. Beside her, a man who looked slightly uncomfortable, but was still trying to appear assertive. Jamal didn't need to ask. He already knew. This wasn't a friendly visit. Karen stopped right in front of him, arms still crossed, her gaze locked onto him like a hawk watching its prey. Karen, coldly, you need to clean up your yard immediately. Jamal blinked.
No greeting. No introduction.
Just an order. He glanced at Peter, who hesitated before clearing his throat and trying to sound firm. Peter, there are rules here, and you have to follow them. Jamal studied them for a long moment. Then, he chuckled softly, shaking his head. Jamal, calmly, really? I just moved in, and I'm already getting orders. Karen, sharply, we're not giving orders. We're ensuring that everyone follows the neighborhood standards. Jamal looked around at his yard. Sure, he wasn't fully unpacked yet, but nothing about it was messy. Jamal, slowly, composed. And you think you have the right to give me instructions on my own property? Karen hesitated for a fraction of a second, not liking his tone. Karen, firmly, I'm not giving instructions. I'm helping you understand how this neighborhood works. Jamal narrowed his eyes slightly, slipping his hands into his pockets. Jamal, oh? And who exactly are you to be teaching me how to live here? Karen took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing in return.
Karen, I'm Karen Keltwell.
I've lived here for over 20 years. And I'm the one who keeps order in Maplewood Falls. Jamal nodded slightly, his expression unreadable.
Jamal, ah.
So you've appointed yourself as the town sheriff. Karen's expression hardened. Karen, without hesitation, someone has to make sure this town stays clean and orderly. If not, it'll turn into chaos. Peter, standing beside her, awkwardly nodded along. Peter, yeah, there are standards here. Jamal sighed, his posture still completely relaxed. Jamal, so you see a few boxes on my lawn and immediately decide I'm a problem?
Karen presset her lips toget her.
Karen, I see someone who isn't respecting the rules. And I'm trying to prevent that. Jamal took a small step forward, looking directly into her eyes.
Jamal, steadily, no.
You're not trying to help anyone. You're just trying to control. The air shifted. The tension thickened. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but she had no response. And that frustrated her more than anything. She was used to giving orders. She was used to not being questioned. But this man? He wasn't afraid of her. The air between them grew thick with tension, as if the entire street was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Karen, who had spent years giving orders without resistance, who had built her reputation on never being questioned, now found herself facing someone who was utterly unfazed by the authority she had created for herself. She could not let this end like this. She would not allow a newcomer, whoever he was, to threaten the position she had built over the years. So she clenched her fists, forcing her voice to remain steady, and looked Jamal dead in the eye. Karen, snapping, even if you're the sheriff, you still have to follow the rules. But the moment the words left her mouth, she felt something shift. She was no longer sure of herself. Because this was no longer a confrontation she could win simply by acting superior. Jamal wasn't just another resident she could push around. He was sheriff of Maplewood Falls. A man with real authority, not the kind she had imagined for herself. She could intimidate her neighbors with talk of neighborhood rules, but she could not intimidate this man. Even so, Karen refused to back down easily. She had to hold her ground. She had to keep fighting. But, for the first time in years, she felt like she was losing. Jamal didn't smirk. He didn't mock her. He remained calm, as if he had seen too many people like Karen before in his career. Jamal, gentle but firm, you're trying to hold on to control, aren't you? Karen pressed her lips together, but didn't answer. Jamal, this isn't really about my yard or a few boxes anymore, is it? Jamal took a small step closer, locking eyes with her. Jamal, soft, deliberate, you want people to fear you. Peter, standing beside Karen, visibly flinched at those words. Because it was true. Karen didn't just want order. She wanted power. Jamal moved forward slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. Jamal, but you know what, Karen? Rules aren't meant to be weapons for controlling people. Karen's hands tightened into fists, but she said nothing. Jamal, if you truly care about this community, then start with respect. Jamal tilted his head slightly, his voice lowering. Jamal, not by making people feel small. His words hit Karen like a punch straight to her ego. She wanted to argue. Wanted to say that she was just doing the right thing. Wanted to insist that she wasn't trying to control anyone. But she couldn't. Because deep down, she knew Jamal was right. Peter, the man who had always stood behind her, lowered his gaze, as if he too was seeing the truth for the first time. Karen's throat felt dry. She had controlled this neighborhood for years. And now, in just a few short minutes, she was losing it. There were no threats.
No heated arguments.
Just the truth. And the truth was suffocating her. She couldn't fight back. Because she was wrong. And she knew it. Jamal didn't smile in victory. He simply stood there, calm and steady, as if he was waiting to see what Karen would do next. Peter glanced at her, as if he too was waiting. And for the first time in years, Karen didn't know what to do. For the first time in years, Karen Caldwell felt lost. She had always believed she was right, that she was the one maintaining order, the one protecting the quality of life in the neighborhood. She had never questioned her methods. She had never considered the possibility that she might be the problem. But now, as she stood face to face with Jamal's calm yet piercing gaze, as she absorbed Peter's silence, and as she realized she had no valid argument left, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. Maybe I was wrong. Peter, who had always stood by her side, felt it too. For years, he had never questioned Karen, had never thought too deeply about what they were doing. He had simply followed her lead, trusting that she knew what was best. But now, looking back, all they had ever done was tear people down, not help them. In the days that followed, something unusual happened in Maplewood Falls. Karen no longer patrolled the neighborhood, scanning for violations. She no longer stood at a distance, watching people like a hawk, waiting for them to step out of line. She no longer pointed out minor infractions, just for the sake of correction. She became quiet. And then, something no one expected happened. One afternoon, she walked past a house where the grass had grown a little too tall. A few months ago, she would have immediately knocked on the door, scolding the homeowner for not respecting the neighborhood standards. But this time, she simply paused for a moment, sighed, and walked away. She was learning to let go. Peter changed too. He was no longer the man who blindly nodded along. He began thinking for himself. And that was so much better. Jamal didn't come to Maplewood Falls to control anyone. He didn't come to take charge, to issue commands, or to impose his own rules. He simply wanted a town where people respected one another. A place where no one had to live in fear of making a minor mistake. A place where everyone could exist freely, as long as they weren't harming anyone else. And under his leadership, things started to change. People stopped walking on eggshells. They began to open up to one another. They started greeting each other more. They began helping each other more. Maplewood Falls became a more open, less oppressive place. And most importantly, it became a place truly worth living in. One morning, Karen stood on her porch, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the street unfold before her. Neighbors laughed and chatted, no longer burdened by an atmosphere of tension and scrutiny. Peter stepped out from the house next door, also holding a cup of coffee. They exchanged a look, and they both knew something had changed forever. Peter, smirking, feels different, doesn't it? Karen, sighing, nodding, yeah. But I think it's a good thing. Peter nodded in agreement. Together, they looked toward the end of the street, where Jamal Williams, the man they once saw as a threat, stood among a group of neighbors. He was smiling, talking, shaking hands. He wasn't the man who had come to destroy their town. He was the man who had come to make it better. And at last, Karen understood that. She set her coffee cup down, took a deep breath, and exhaled. Karen, softly, almost to herself. Maybe, change isn't such a bad thing. The town was still peaceful. The streets remained clean, the porches tidy, the lawns trimmed just right. But something had changed. Before that, peace had come from control, from the fear of judgment, from the unspoken rules that Karen and Peter had enforced for years. But now, people lived together with respect, not fear. No one worried if their car was parked slightly off-center. No one felt anxious about forgetting a trash bin outside for an extra day. People became more open, more free, and that made Maplewood Falls more livable than ever before. Karen Caldwell was no longer the rigid enforcer of the neighborhood. She no longer inspected every detail, looking for something to correct. She no longer watched her neighbors with scrutinizing eyes. She had learned an important lesson, a lesson in humility. And most importantly, she had learned how to listen. Peter, the man who had once followed her blindly, had changed too. He was no longer a shadow, no longer a man who obeyed without question. He had begun to think for himself, to ask questions instead of just following orders. The two of them remained friends, but they were no longer the ruling duo of Maplewood Falls. Jamal did not come to control the town. He did not come to give orders or tell people how to live. He came to make it better. As sheriff, he had power. But he did not use that power to impose control. He used it to protect. To build a community where people could live with mutual respect. And he succeeded. Respect does not come from power. It comes from how we treat each other. Jamal never forced anyone to change. He simply showed them a better way to live. And in the end, Maplewood Falls learned that lesson. If this story made you think, don't just scroll away, take action. Like this video to help spread awareness. Share it with your friends and family, because conversations spark change.
Comment below and tell us your two cooks.
Have you ever witnessed an abuse of power?
Let's talk about it.
Follow our channel for more powerful real-life stories. And turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Change starts with awareness. Awareness starts with you. Be part of the movement.